Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. It was a sunny afternoon, and we were at a cafe, enjoying a quiet moment together. Suddenly, a man walked up to our table. He looked at my husband with recognition in his eyes and called him by a name I had never heard before. I froze. My husband's face immediately changed. His smile disappeared, replaced by something darker. He quickly told the stranger that he had the wrong person and dismissed him. But the damage was done. Why did he react so strangely? Why was he being called by a different name? That evening, I tried to bring up what had happened. Who was that man? And why did he call you by another name? I asked, hoping for an explanation. My husband laughed it off, telling me it was a misunderstanding, that the man must have confused him with someone else. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But something about his reaction didn't sit right with me. It felt like there was something he wasn't telling me. A part of his life that was hidden, intentionally. The name the stranger had called him kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't just the name that bothered me, but the way my husband had acted. His eyes darted nervously, and he seemed to be lost in thought for a long time afterward. When I pressed him further, he insisted that I was overthinking it. But I knew deep down that there was more to the story. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the first crack in the perfect facade of our marriage. Days passed, but I couldn't let it go. I decided to do a little digging. I began looking through old photos, trying to find any clues about my husband's past. There were pictures of him with friends, family, and colleagues, but not a single person from his past had ever mentioned this other name. I found it odd. It was as if this man had never existed. I was starting to feel like I was on the brink of discovering something huge, something that would change everything I thought I knew about him. A week later, I asked my husband again about the name. This time, his reaction was even more intense. He snapped at me, telling me to drop it. "It's nothing, just forget about it," he said. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't nothing. There was a story behind that name, and he wasn't ready to share it with me. I felt like I was on the outside of something important, something that had been deliberately kept from me. I spent the next few days trying to distract myself, but every time I looked at my husband, I couldn't stop thinking about the secret he was keeping. I started asking around, reaching out to mutual friends and family members, hoping to find something that could explain the mystery. But everyone seemed to know so little about his past, and none of them mentioned the name that had haunted me. It felt like I was chasing a ghost, one that would never be caught. I decided to take matters into my own hands. One day, I went back to the cafe where the stranger had approached us. I wanted to see if I could find any clues. I spoke to the barista who had served us that day, asking if he remembered the man. To my surprise, the barista mentioned that the man had looked familiar but couldn't recall his name. But then he added something odd. He said the man had been there before, several months ago, and had seemed to know my husband well. The plot was thickening, and I felt my heart race. That evening, I confronted my husband again. This time, I told him I had been to the cafe, that I had spoken to the barista, and that I knew the man had been there before. His face paled, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of fear in his eyes. "I told you it's nothing," he said, his voice trembling slightly. But I wasn't convinced anymore. I demanded answers, and he finally caved. "All right, fine," he said, lowering his voice. "There's something I haven't told you, but you're not going to like it." My heart skipped a beat as he began to speak. He told me that the man who had called him by a different name was someone from his past, a part of his life that he had tried to leave behind. He had changed his name years ago to escape that life, to build a new identity, and to put the past in the past. But now, it seemed that past was catching up with him. He explained that he had been involved in some things back then that he wasn't proud of, things that had to stay hidden. As I listened to him, I realized that the man I had married wasn't the person I thought he was. My mind was spinning. I had always believed that we were building a future together, that our love was unshakable. But now, everything felt like a lie. How could I have married a man with such a secret past? Could I trust him? Was everything he had told me before just another layer of deception? As I looked at him, I saw the man I loved, but I also saw someone I didn't know, someone who had been hiding behind a mask for far too long. The fear of losing him, of losing everything we had built together, started to creep into my heart. After much thought, I made a decision. I wasn't going to walk away, not yet. I loved him, and I knew there had to be more to the story than what he had told me so far. But I needed answers, full, honest answers. I needed to know everything. No more secrets. No more lies. If we were going to have a future together, he had to come clean. I sat down with him, looking him in the eyes, and told him I needed the truth, all of it, no matter how painful it was. He sat there in silence, his face clouded with conflict. For a long time, he didn't speak. I could see the battle raging within him. I reached out, touching his hand, urging him to trust me. Slowly, he began to speak, his voice shaky and low. He told me about a life he had lived before we met, one filled with mistakes and dangerous decisions. There were people from his past he had hurt, and in order to protect me, he had buried it all. He had changed his name, moved cities, and severed all ties with that life. But now, it seemed the past was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. My heart ached for him, but I also felt the weight of his secrets crushing me. I spent the following days in a haze of confusion and disbelief. Everything we had built together seemed tainted by his lies. I thought I knew the man I married, but now I wasn't sure. He had hidden his past from me, kept me in the dark, and had built our entire relationship on a foundation of half-truths. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the man I loved with the man who had concealed so much from me. Was our love real, or was it just another lie? I couldn't tell anymore. As I wrestled with my feelings, I began to see my husband in a new light. Every time he would go quiet, every time he looked over his shoulder as if he was being followed, I couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes. It wasn't just about his past, it was about the threat that was hanging over us. His secrets were no longer just his own, they were mine too. I felt like I was walking in the shadows of his past, unable to escape the weight of the unknown. I wondered how long it would be before it all came crashing down on us. Then came the first real sign that his past was coming back to haunt us. One evening, we received an anonymous letter, postmarked from a place neither of us had been for years. Inside, it contained a single sentence: "Your past is catching up to you." My heart dropped. My husband's face turned ashen as he read the letter, and I saw him struggle to hold it together. He told me it was nothing, just someone trying to get under his skin. But I knew better. The threat was real, and it was closer than we thought. As the days passed, the pressure grew. My husband became more withdrawn, more anxious. He started making secret phone calls, pacing around the house late at night. When I asked him what was going on, he would brush me off, telling me everything was fine. But I could see the cracks forming. The man who had once been so confident was now a shell of himself, living in constant fear. I couldn't help but feel that the truth was slipping through my fingers, and time was running out. It all came to a head one night when my husband received a phone call in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of his voice, tense and low. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I could tell it wasn't good. He was trying to keep his voice steady, but it was shaking with fear. After he hung up, he turned to me, his face pale and stricken with guilt. "I can't keep running," he said. "The past is here. It's coming for me." That was the moment I realized that everything I had feared was true. His past was more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. He finally opened up, telling me things I never expected to hear. He had been involved in a criminal organization years ago, one that operated in the shadows of society. His name had been linked to several unsavory activities, and he had walked away from it all in order to start over. But leaving that life behind didn't mean it would leave him alone. The people from his past were still out there, and they wanted something from him, something he could never give them. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to his confession, but it was also the moment I realized just how deep his secret ran. It wasn't long after his confession that things began to spiral out of control. More letters arrived, each one more threatening than the last. Strange phone calls came in the middle of the night. My husband started acting more erratically, jumping at every sound, looking over his shoulder as if he expected someone to be there. I tried to comfort him, to assure him that we could get through this together, but the fear in his eyes was overwhelming. I could see the toll it was taking on him, on both of us. One day, a man showed up at our door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like someone who didn't take no for an answer. My husband's face went pale when he saw him, and I knew something bad was about to happen. The man didn't say much, only that he needed to speak with my husband. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I stayed silent, watching as my husband followed the man outside. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized I was no longer sure if I was living in the present, or if we were both living in the past that he had tried so hard to bury. My husband was gone for what felt like hours. I paced around the house, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When he finally returned, his face was grim, his posture defeated. He sat down without saying a word, just staring ahead. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with a mixture of regret and sorrow. "They know where we are," he said quietly. "They've been watching us. It's only a matter of time before they come for me. And for us." My world seemed to crumble as his words sank in. I knew we couldn't keep running forever. My husband's past was no longer just his burden to bear, it had become mine too. The fear, the uncertainty, it was consuming both of us. I asked him if there was any way out, any chance of making it stop. "There's nothing I can do," he said, shaking his head. "The past doesn't let go. It never does." In that moment, I realized that our lives were at a crossroads. We could stay and face whatever was coming, or we could try to escape. But escape wasn't an option without consequences. I didn't know if I was strong enough to live with those consequences, but I had to decide. The days that followed were filled with endless conversations and sleepless nights. My husband apologized over and over for the pain he had caused, for keeping such a monumental secret from me. But no matter how much he apologized, it didn't change the fact that he had lied to me. The trust we once had was shattered, and I didn't know how to piece it back together. Yet, even with everything that had come to light, I still loved him. I couldn't imagine a life without him. But was love enough to hold us together when our world was falling apart? The phone calls became more frequent. The threats grew bolder. Finally, my husband made a choice that I never saw coming. He agreed to meet with someone from his past, someone who had the power to end this nightmare, if he was willing to pay the price. It was a deal with the devil, but it was the only way he could protect us. I didn't know the full details, but I knew it would come at a cost. The fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was willing to do anything to keep me safe, even if it meant sacrificing a part of himself. The night before the meeting, I asked my husband if he was sure about what he was doing. "Once I make this deal, there's no going back," he said quietly. I could hear the resignation in his voice. "I have to do this for you, for us." He kissed me softly, as if it were the last time. The weight of his decision hung heavy between us, and I knew that whatever happened tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. The man I had married was no longer just my husband. He was someone shaped by his past, and that past would haunt him for the rest of his life. The next day, my husband left to meet with the man who held our fate in his hands. I spent hours waiting, the minutes dragging by like an eternity. When he finally came back, his face was unreadable. He told me the deal was done. The threats were over. We were free. But I knew it wasn't that simple. His past would always be with him, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of what he had done. I couldn't shake the feeling that the deal he made had cost him something I couldn't understand. But for the time being, we had our peace. Life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the scars remained. My husband was no longer the same man he had been before. He was quieter, more distant, and though he tried to reassure me that everything was behind us, I knew better. There were still nights when I would wake up to find him staring into the darkness, his face etched with regret. The man I had married was forever changed, and I was still trying to figure out who he really was. But in the end, I loved him, and that love was enough to carry us forward, at least for now. Just when I thought we had left his past behind, it came back, in the form of another letter. This time, it was not a threat, but a warning. "You can't outrun it forever," the letter read. "I'll be waiting." My heart sank as I realized that no matter how hard we tried, the past would never fully let go. It would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface. My husband looked at the letter and sighed, as if he knew this day would come. We both knew that the past wasn't finished with us. It was just biding its time. I had a choice to make. We could keep running, keep trying to escape from his past, or we could face it head on. I knew my husband didn't want to go back to that life. He had done everything in his power to leave it behind. But the past had a way of catching up, no matter how far you ran. "We need to confront it," I said, more to myself than to him. "We need to face whatever it is, together." His eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to put his past to rest once and for all. We went back to where it all started, the place my husband had once called home. He took me to the old neighborhood, to the people who had once been a part of his life. It was a difficult journey, but together, we faced the demons of his past. We didn't have all the answers, but we found something even more important, the strength to move forward. With each step, I learned that the man I married was not perfect, but he was mine, and that was enough. In the end, we didn't outrun the past. We embraced it, and together, we built a future. Thank you for listening to my story until now. If you like the video, please support it by subscribing and liking.